The party invitations were already sent while I was dying in the ICU. My name is Vincent Miller, and my 3 children were celebrating my death before it happened. They'd booked the Ritz-Carlton ballroom for November 25th, sent invitations to 50 guests, ordered champagne and shrimp cocktail. The invitation read, "Celebrating Vincent's life," with a note about moving forward together. What they really meant was, finally free from their embarrassing janitor father, free to split what they assumed was nothing but hospital debt, free to tell people their dad was gone without mentioning he cleaned office floors for 35 years. But here's what Neela, Silas, and Adela didn't know as they planned their freedom party. I'd been awake in that hospital bed for 3 days, listening to every word, every cruel calculation about my worthless truck, every joke about my pathetic savings account, every plan to sell my house before the medical bills bankrupted them. They had no idea about the $4.8 million stock portfolio. No clue that the CEO of Mid-Atlantic Financial visited me twice a week, not for charity, but for business advice. Zero knowledge that I'd been the company's secret strategic consultant for 15 years, turning custodial observations into executive insights. While they celebrated their inheritance of debt, I was planning the biggest financial education of their lives. You know what really gets me about family betrayal? It's not the money. It's watching your own children become people you wouldn't hire to clean your floors. But sometimes, life gives you the perfect opportunity to teach them what real wealth looks like. If you've ever been written off because of your job title, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because what happens next will change how you think about success forever. Let me tell you how a janitor's children learned the hardest lesson about respect, dignity, and the compound interest of family karma. Let me start from the beginning. November 15th, 2024, 3:47 p.m. I was buffing the 45th floor of Mid-Atlantic Financial Corporation when the chest pain hit. Same mahogany boardroom I'd cleaned for 35 years. Same tenant floor buffer I'd pushed since Bush Sr. was president. The paramedics found my work badge. Vincent Miller, Custodial Services, employee number 0247. Start date March 3rd, 1989. What they didn't know? I'd bought stock every single paycheck for 35 years. My kids arrived at Emory University Hospital around 8 p.m. Neela Miller Hayes first, vice president of marketing at some competing firm. She walked past my bed like I was furniture. "How long does he have?" she asked the doctor. Not, "How is Dad?" Not, "Will he recover?" Just the timeline for her inheritance. Silas came next. Silas Miller Jr., though he legally changed it to just Silas Harris 3 years ago. To avoid association, he told his partners at the law firm. My last name was apparently bad for business. Adela showed up last. Adela Miller Stone, investment banker, married money, hyphenated her shame away. She stood in the corner texting. Here's what they discussed while I slept. "Finally," Neela said. 30 years of embarrassment. "Remember when he showed up to your graduation in work boots?" Silas laughed. "I told security he was maintenance," Adela added. "Client dinner that night. Couldn't risk it. The doctor mentioned the bills. $380,000 estimated. My kids exchanged looks. 'What assets?' Neela asked. 'That old Ford truck,' Silas shrugged. 'Maybe 2,700. The house needs major work,' Adela calculated. 'Probably upside down on the mortgage. They were wrong about everything.' See, while they climbed corporate ladders, I'd been building wealth. Quietly, carefully. $50 from every paycheck since 1989. Mid-Atlantic Financial stock. Employee purchase plan. 20% discount. I'd watched that company grow from regional player to Fortune 500. Watched stock splits. Reinvested dividends. Compounded interest working like magic. But my kids never asked about my finances. Never asked about anything, really. Grammar, Dad, Neela would correct when I spoke. It's saw, not seen. Volume, Dad, Silas would whisper at restaurants. People are staring. Presentation, Dad, Adela would say. Image matters in my world. My world was simple. Clean floors. Empty trash. Maintain dignity. And apparently that wasn't worth their respect. The irony? While they earned 6 figures, I'd been quietly becoming a millionaire. The CEO, Thomas Anderson, visited me personally twice a week. Not for pity, for advice. See, when you clean executive offices for 35 years, you hear things. Market trends, merger talks, quarterly strategies. I'd become his unofficial pulse checker, his eyes and ears in the company. Vincent sees everything, he'd tell his board. 35 years of perfect attendance. Never missed a day when his wife was dying. Never complained when budgets got tight. That's character. My kid saw janitor. He saw wisdom. The night shift nurse, Patricia Williams, she'd worked HR before switching careers. She knew the truth about my reputation. She'd seen my performance reviews. Trusted, they read. Insightful. Invaluable. While my children planned their celebration, I made my own plans. The CEO's personal number was programmed in my phone, but they didn't need to know that yet. By day 2, the planning was in full swing. Neela had spreadsheets, Silas had legal contacts, Adela had funeral home brochures. They sat in the hospital cafeteria, voices low but not low enough. I could hear everything through the baby monitor system they'd installed for my comfort. Medical bills first, Neela calculated. $380, maybe $400,000 total. House is mortgaged at $260, Silas added. Equity maybe $40,000 after realtor fees. Truck, tools, furniture, Adela tallied. $10,000 if we're lucky. So negative $350, Neela concluded. We're paying for his death. The resentment was decades deep. Every parent-teacher conference I'd attended in work clothes. Every graduation where I'd embarrassed them with my blue-collar pride. Every family photo they'd cropped me out of. I'd thought love meant sacrifice. Working double shifts so they could have college without debt. Skipping vacations so they could have summer camps. Living small so they could dream big. They'd interpreted it as failure. Remember when he tried to give me stock tips? Silas laughed. A janitor explaining PE ratios. What he didn't know, those tips had made me rich. Mid-Atlantic stock in 1989, $12 per share. Current price, $57.14, plus 3 stock splits, plus 35 years of dividend reinvestment. My Merrill Lynch account statement showed the truth. $4.8 million in Mid-Atlantic stock, $127,000 in annual dividend income, more than any of their salaries. But they'd never asked to see my finances, never wondered how a janitor afforded a house in their expensive neighborhood, never questioned my calm confidence during their financial struggles. I'd offered help. They'd declined with condescension. We don't need charity, Dad, Neela had said when her marketing firm was struggling. Some of us earned our money legitimately, Silas had sniffed when I'd offered to co-sign his first house. I can't be seen taking handouts, Adela had explained when I'd offered to pay for her wedding. Pride had cost them millions in assistance I'd gladly given. Now they were counting on inheriting debt. The stakes were becoming clear. If I stayed silent, they'd spend the next 30 years believing their father was a burden. They'd tell their children, my grandchildren, that Grandpa Danny was a cautionary tale about settling for less. But if I revealed the truth, everything would change. The question wasn't whether I could afford to stay quiet. The question was whether they could afford my silence. Their careers were built on image management. Neela's marketing firm specialized in executive presence consulting. Silas's law practice focused on high net worth estate planning. Adela's investment banking required sophisticated client relationships. How would their professional reputations survive the revelation that they'd publicly dismissed a multimillionaire father as worthless? The hospital bills were mounting. Room 1204, cardiac ICU, $2,800 per day. Specialists, tests, medications, insurance would cover 70%. They were calculating bankruptcy. I was calculating justice. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas Anderson. Board meeting Tuesday. Need your insights on the quarterly numbers. Neela glanced over. Who texts a janitor about business? If only she knew. The CEO of a Fortune 500 company valued my opinion more than my own children valued my existence. But the real stakes weren't financial. They were familial. If I stayed silent, they'd bury me with shame. Tell their friends about the burden they'd endured. Make my life story a cautionary tale about aim higher, achieve more, don't settle for cleaning floors. If I spoke up, they'd have to reconcile 35 years of condescension with the reality of my success. Either way, our relationships were ending. The only question was whether I'd exit as their disappointment or their education. The spreadsheets were wrong. The assumptions were wrong. The disrespect was about to cost them everything. But they still didn't know about the security cameras, or the recorded conversations, or the CEO's personal interest in my well-being. The stakes were higher than hospital bills. They were about to discover that dignity has dividends and respect compounds annually. The party planning was accelerating. Venue booked, Ritz-Carlton Atlanta, Grand Ballroom, $15,000 rental fee charged to Adela's credit card. They were celebrating my death before it happened. Time for the guest list to get interesting. Wednesday morning brought the family conference call. I listened through the baby monitor as they coordinated from the hospital corridor. Professional voices, executive tones, 30 years of MBA education solving the dad problem. Memorial service or celebration of life? Neela asked, consulting her notes. Neither, Silas replied. Estate settlement meeting. More efficient. I like that, Adela agreed. Business approach. Clean transition. Clean transition. Like I was a corporate merger. The speed shocked me. 48 hours in ICU, and they were already dividing assets that didn't exist. Planning eulogies for a man they'd never understood. Guest list, Neela continued. Keep it small. Professional contacts only. No work friends, Silas insisted. Nobody from that place. That place. Mid-Atlantic Financial Corporation, where I'd spent more hours than I'd spent at home, where I'd earned their college tuition, their car payments, their down payments. Absolutely not, Adela agreed. This is about moving forward, not dwelling on his choices. My choices. Like providing for ungrateful children was a character flaw. The conversation turned tactical. Venue secured. Ritz-Carlton, Atlanta, November 25th, 7 p.m. Catering, light appetizers, cash bar, parking, validated for guests. What about the will? Silas asked. Probate timeline? Neela had researched this. For estates under 50,000 simplified process, maybe 3 months. 50,000, Adela laughed. Generous estimate. They were wrong by $4.75 million. My phone buzzed. Text from Thomas Anderson. How are you feeling? Board is concerned. Tuesday meeting rescheduled until you're available. I typed back slowly. Recovering well. We'll be ready soon. We need your market insights, he replied, especially the Q4 projections. Nobody reads corporate dynamics like you do. Neela glanced at my phone screen. Who keeps texting you? Probably spam, Silas dismissed. Target demographics. Senior financial opportunities. If they only knew. The planning intensified. Adela had created a timeline. Memorial gathering, brief remarks, then private family meeting for asset distribution. How brief? Neela asked. 15 minutes, Adela calculated. Any longer feels performative. 15 minutes. 35 years of marriage, child-rearing, and sacrifice summarized in 15 minutes. Remarks, Silas asked. Who's speaking? Silence. Nobody wanted to eulogize the father they'd spent decades minimizing. We'll keep it general, Neela finally said. Focus on perseverance, work ethic, simple values. Simple values. Code for limited ambition. I can handle the financial overview, Silas offered. Estate settlement, debt consolidation, final closure. Final closure. Like my life was a failed business venture. The irony was perfect. 3 executives armed with advanced degrees and corporate experience, completely missing the biggest financial story of their careers. While they planned my memorial, I was planning my resurrection. The text thread with Thomas Anderson continued. Vincent, the quarterly numbers look strong. Your prediction about the Memphis acquisition was spot on. Board wants to discuss your consulting role post-retirement. Consulting role. The CEO of Mid-Atlantic wanted to formalize what we'd been doing informally for years, strategic advice from someone who understood the company's pulse. My children were planning to inherit debt. The CEO was planning to pay me consulting fees. Catering confirmed, Adela announced. Shrimp cocktail, cheese boards, wine selection, classy but not expensive. Perfect, Neela agreed. Matches the tone we want. The tone they wanted. Dignified poverty, respectable failure. A man who tried hard but never quite succeeded. The conversations were being recorded. Hospital security cameras captured every planning session. My phone documented every dismissive comment. They didn't know about my friendship with Robert Johnson, head of security. 20 years of coffee breaks, shared stories, mutual respect. He'd been discreetly archiving footage at my request. Legal questions? Silas asked, switching to attorney mode. Standard stuff, Neela replied. Medicaid recovery, creditor claims, property liens. Nothing complicated for a simple estate. Simple estate, $4.8 million, and they called it simple. Timeline? Adela asked. When can we close this chapter? Close this chapter. 35 years of fatherhood, and they wanted to close the chapter. 3 months, Silas estimated. Sooner if there are no complications. No complications. Like discovering your poor father was actually wealthier than all 3 of you combined. The call ended with assignments. Neela handled venue details, Silas managed legal paperwork, Adela coordinated guest communications, efficient, professional, heartless. They were executing my death with the same cold competence they brought to corporate projects, maximizing efficiency, minimizing emotional investment, optimizing outcomes. But they'd made one critical error. They'd assumed their intelligence was superior to my experience. 35 years of listening to executive strategies, watching corporate maneuvers, learning from the best business minds in Atlanta. They thought education made them smart. I knew observation made me wise. The memorial was scheduled for 7 p.m., November 25th, Thanksgiving week. Convenient for their calendars, symbolic for their priorities. But November 25th was also the Mid-Atlantic Annual Board meeting, the one where Thomas Anderson planned to announce the consulting partnership, the one where my stock options would be formally discussed. The timing was perfect. While they celebrated my death, I'd be demonstrating my value. The guest list was about to get very interesting. Thursday brought unexpected visitors. Thomas Anderson arrived first, around 11 a.m. Corner office CEO, hand-tailored suit, personal security detail. He walked straight to my bedside like we were old friends, because we were. "Vincent," he said, pulling up a chair. "The quarterly projections came in. You were right about the consumer confidence numbers." My children gathered in the corridor, stared through the glass window. Neela whispered urgently to Silas, who shrugged in confusion. "The Memphis acquisition closed yesterday," Thomas continued. "Exactly like you predicted. Stock price jumped 4% in after-hours trading." I smiled weakly, playing the patient role. Market was ready for consolidation. 35 years, he shook his head. "You've never been wrong about market timing, not once." Through the window, I watched Adela recording our conversation on her phone. Probably thinking it was charity visit, CEO doing good PR. They had no idea we'd been having these conversations for 15 years. "Board meeting Tuesday," Thomas said quietly. "We need to formalize the consulting arrangement. Your insights are worth more than my entire analyst team." He pulled out a manila folder. "Retirement packages, consulting fees, stock option extensions. Legal wants to discuss terms when you're ready. Stock option extensions." The phrase hung in the air like smoke. My children pressed closer to the window. "Also," Thomas added, "Patricia Williams mentioned some family concerns. About medical bills? Patricia Williams, HR director, former head of employee benefits. She'd processed my stock purchases for decades, watched my portfolio grow, calculated my dividend payments. She knew exactly how much those medical bills meant to my net worth. Practically nothing." "Don't worry about expenses," Thomas said firmly. "Company health plan covers everything, plus disability benefits, plus the executive care package." Executive care package, reserved for senior leadership and special consultants. 47 years old when you started, Thomas reminisced. 2 kids in diapers, wife fighting cancer. You could have taken the pharmaceutical sales job. Better money, easier work. "Mid-Atlantic felt like family," I replied. "You made it family," he corrected. "Loyalty like yours is rare." He stood, checking his watch. "I'll let you rest. But Tuesday's meeting is important. The consulting role pays $200,000 annually, plus stock bonuses. $200,000, more than any of my children's salaries." After he left, my kids rushed in. "Dad," Neela said carefully, "who was that man?" "Thomas," I replied simply. "Thomas who?" Silas pressed. "Thomas Anderson, CEO." The silence stretched forever. "The CEO visited you personally?" Adela asked. "We talk sometimes." "About what?" Neela demanded. "Work things, market stuff." They exchanged glances. This didn't fit their narrative. "Dad," Silas said slowly, "how do you know the CEO personally?" 35 years, I shrugged. "You see people around, but I could see their wheels turning. CEOs don't visit janitors unless—" Friday brought more visitors. Patricia Williams arrived around 2 p.m., carrying a thick folder of paperwork. "Vincent," she said warmly, "retirement benefit calculations. Thomas asked me to review everything personally." She spread documents across my bedside table. Pension statements, 401k summaries, stock option schedules, dividend projections. My children crowded around, trying to read upside-down numbers. 35 years of service, Patricia explained. Perfect attendance record, maximum pension benefits, full stock vesting, executive health care continuation. She pointed to a number that made Adela gasp. Monthly pension, $2,400. Annual dividend income, $127,000. Stock portfolio, current value. She paused, glancing at my children. "Should we discuss this privately?" "Family can hear," I said quietly. $4.8 million, she finished. The room went silent except for heart monitors beeping. Neela sat down heavily. Silas's mouth fell open. Adela dropped her phone. There's more, Patricia continued. The consulting contract Thomas mentioned. $200,000 annually, plus performance bonuses. She gathered the papers neatly. Any questions about the retirement package? Nobody spoke. I'll leave these for your review, she said. Board meeting Tuesday will finalize everything. After she left, my children stared at me like I was a stranger. The memorial planning was about to get complicated. Friday evening brought the breaking point. My children huddled in the family conference room, voices low but emotions high. The baby monitor captured every word. $4.8 million, Neela kept repeating. $4.8 million. It doesn't make sense, Silas insisted. Janitors don't have investment portfolios. The documents looked real, Adela said. Patricia Williams is head of HR. She wouldn't lie about pension benefits. But they weren't processing the truth. They were managing the crisis. The memorial is tomorrow night, Neela said. 50 guests confirmed. Local news crew scheduled. We can't cancel now. Local news crew. They'd invited media to cover my humble memorial service. New plan, Silas announced, shifting to damage control mode. We pivot. Frame it as celebration of his unexpected success. Unexpected success, Adela nodded. Good angle. Local janitors' inspiring financial journey. They were already spinning the narrative. Not we were wrong about Dad, but Dad surprised everyone. Saturday morning, November 25th, brought chaos. The Ritz-Carlton Grand Ballroom was decorated with modest flowers and simple photo displays. My children had chosen pictures carefully. Me in work clothes, humble settings, authentic blue-collar imagery. The banner read, Celebrating Vincent Miller, a Life of Service. Service. Even in death, they couldn't call me successful. But the guest list had evolved beyond their control. Thomas Anderson arrived early, along with the entire Mid-Atlantic executive team. Patricia Williams brought half the HR department. Robert Johnson led a contingent from security. My coworkers started flowing in around 6 p.m. 35 years of night shift custodians, day shift maintenance, building engineers, parking attendants. People my children had never met, but who knew me better than they did. The local news crew interviewed Neela first. Tell us about your father's legacy. Humility, she said carefully. Dad taught us that honest work has dignity. Honest work. Like wealth disqualified integrity. He was surprisingly savvy, she continued. We're still learning about his investments. Surprisingly savvy. The condescension never stopped. The crowd was mixing awkwardly. Executives in $1,000 suits chatting with janitors in polyester uniforms. My children's professional contacts looking confused about the guest diversity. Then Thomas Anderson took the microphone. I want to tell you about the Vincent Miller I knew, he began. For 15 years, Vincent has been my most trusted advisor. Not officially. Not on any organizational chart. But every major decision, every market prediction, every strategic move, I ran it past Vincent first. My children's faces went white. When we acquired Memphis Financial in 2019, Thomas continued, Vincent called it 6 months early, said consumer confidence would peak in Q2, perfect timing for expansion. The audience was captivating, especially the media crew. When we survived the 2020 crisis, Thomas said, Vincent's advice saved us. Don't panic sell, he told me. This is opportunity, not catastrophe. He was right. We emerged stronger. Neela was frantically texting someone, probably trying to control the narrative. But here's what impressed me most, Thomas said, his voice carrying across the ballroom. Vincent never asked for credit, never demanded recognition, never leveraged his influence for personal gain. The crowd murmured appreciatively. He just showed up, every day, for 35 years, cleaned our offices, shared his wisdom, and built one of the most impressive stock portfolios I've ever seen. Adela stood up, moving toward the microphone. Damage control mode. Thank you, she interrupted politely. Dad would be surprised by all this attention. Surprised? Thomas asked. Vincent knew exactly what he'd accomplished. We talked about it regularly. The room fell silent. In fact, Thomas continued, we have a board meeting Tuesday to finalize his consulting contract, $200,000 annually. Vincent's insights are invaluable. The news crew was filming everything. Silas tried to join Adela at the microphone. What my sister means is, I know what I mean, Thomas cut him off, his CEO authority filling the room. Vincent Miller is one of the smartest businessmen I've ever met. His stock portfolio is worth $4.8 million. His market predictions have guided this company for decades. The audience erupted in applause. My coworkers were beaming. The executives were nodding knowingly. My children looked like they were attending someone else's funeral. Patricia Williams approached the microphone next. I've processed Vincent's benefits for 20 years, perfect attendance, maximum contributions, smartest investment strategy I've ever seen. She pulled out a folder of documents. For anyone wondering about Vincent's financial acumen, his annual dividend income exceeds most executive salaries. The news reporter was taking notes furiously. $127,000 annually, Patricia announced. From stock dividends alone. The crowd gasped. Robert Johnson, head of security, took the microphone. Vincent Miller has been my coffee break partner for 20 years. Every morning, 6:15 a.m., we discuss market trends. Vincent called the tech boom, the housing crash, the crypto surge. Never wrong. Not once. He smiled at the memory. My retirement fund exists because Vincent taught me about compound interest. The testimonials continued. Co-worker after co-worker sharing stories of my financial advice, market predictions, investment guidance. People I'd helped buy houses, plan retirements, navigate economic uncertainty. My children stood in the corner, watching their narrative collapse in real time. The local news reporter approached Neela. Sounds like your father was quite the financial expert. Did you know about his investment success? Neela's pause lasted too long. We learned recently about Dad's portfolio. Recently? The reporter pressed. How recently? This week, Neela admitted. The reporter's eyes lit up. This was becoming a story about family dynamics, not financial success. So you planned this memorial not knowing about his wealth? Silas stepped in. We wanted to honor Dad's humility. But you didn't know he was a millionaire, the reporter interrupted. Adela tried to redirect. Dad valued privacy. Is it true you've been planning this event since Tuesday? The reporter asked, consulting her notes. The question hung in the air like an accusation. Thomas Anderson watched from across the room, his expression unreadable but his attention focused. The memorial had become a trial. My children were the defendants. The evidence was their own planning, their own assumptions, their own condescension. The crowd was beginning to understand. These weren't grieving children honoring their father. These were embarrassed executives managing a PR crisis. The truth was spreading through the ballroom like wildfire. The janitor's children had underestimated him. Completely, publicly, catastrophically. The celebration was ending. The reckoning was beginning. Tuesday's board meeting was going to be very interesting. Tuesday morning arrived with surgical precision. I'd been discharged Monday evening, insurance approved, bills covered by my executive health care package. The irony was perfect. While my children worried about bankruptcy, my medical expenses were already resolved. The Mid-Atlantic Financial Corporation boardroom occupied the entire 47th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Atlanta, mahogany conference tables seating 24, executive leather chairs worth more than most cars. I'd cleaned this room every night for 35 years. Now I was attending my first board meeting as a participant, not custodian. Thomas Anderson introduced me simply. Vincent Miller, Senior Strategic Consultant. The board members nodded respectfully. They knew my reputation. The custodian who understood markets better than their analysts. Before we formalize Vincent's consulting role, Thomas announced, let's address the elephant in the room. Vincent's family seems surprised by his financial success. The Saturday memorial had made local news. Janitor's children shocked by father's secret millions was the headline. The story had gone viral on social media. Patricia Williams distributed portfolios to each board member. Vincent's complete investment history 1989 to present. The numbers were staggering, even to executives accustomed to large portfolios. Initial investment, $50 per paycheck, starting March 3, 1989. Stock price at purchase, $12.47 per share. Total shares accumulated, 84,000 shares, including reinvestment and splits. Current share price, $57.14. Portfolio value, $4,801,760. Annual dividend income, $127,134. Percentage of company owned, 0.3%. Significant for individual investor. 35 years of consistent investment, Patricia explained. Never sold a single share. Reinvested every dividend, weathered every market downturn. Board member Margaret Thompson, head of institutional relations, asked the obvious question. How did his children not know? They never asked, I replied simply. The silence was profound. In 35 years, Thomas said slowly, they never asked about your finances? They assumed, I said. Janitor equals poor. Simple equation. Robert Johnson, attending as security director, provided context. I have surveillance footage of the memorial planning. The children calculated negative inheritance, expected bankruptcy. He pulled out transcripts of recorded conversations. Quote, finally 30 years of embarrassment. Quote, maybe 2,700 from the truck. Quote, we're paying for his death. The board members exchanged glances. These weren't grieving children. These were opportunistic heirs. The media attention is uncomfortable, admitted legal counsel James Wilson. The story raises questions about employee compensation, family dynamics, financial literacy. Questions we can answer, Thomas replied. Vincent earned this wealth through intelligence, discipline, and loyalty. His children's ignorance doesn't diminish his achievement. But the real revelation was still coming. Vincent, Thomas continued, show them the recommendation letters. I opened my briefcase, the same one I'd carried for 20 years, containing documents my children had never seen. 15 handwritten letters from Thomas Anderson, dating back to 2009, each one praising my market insights, strategic thinking, operational awareness. December 2019, I read aloud. Thomas Anderson, CEO, to Board of Directors. Vincent Miller's prediction about consumer confidence proved accurate. Recommend formal consultation role. March 2020, I continued. Thomas Anderson to Investment Committee. Vincent's advice during market crisis invaluable. Suggests deep understanding of economic fundamentals. November 2023, I finished. Thomas Anderson to HR Director. Vincent Miller should be considered for senior consultant position. His insights drive company strategy. The board was listening intently. This wasn't charity. This was recognition of genuine expertise. Margaret Thompson asked, Vincent, what's your analysis of current market conditions? I'd been preparing for this question for weeks. Q4 will show consumer confidence decline, but corporate earnings remain strong. Recommend cautious expansion. Focus on debt reduction. Prepare for possible recession in late 2025. The board members were taking notes. These were insights they'd pay consultants thousands to provide. The Memphis acquisition? Thomas prompted. Market timing was perfect, I replied. Consumer confidence peaked in Q2 exactly as projected. Acquisition completed before downturn. Stock price reflected 6 months early. The cryptocurrency investments? Patricia asked. Avoided completely, I said. Volatility too high, fundamentals unclear. Stick with productive assets, dividend-paying stocks, real estate. These weren't janitor observations. These were sophisticated financial analyses. Thomas Anderson smiled. Gentlemen, ladies, I present Vincent Miller, custodian by title, strategist by talent, millionaire by discipline. The formal vote was unanimous. Senior strategic consultant, $200,000 annual salary, plus performance bonuses, plus continued stock options, plus executive benefits package. But the meeting wasn't finished. One more item, Thomas announced. The Miller Family Trust. He nodded to legal counsel, who distributed new documents. Vincent established a family trust Monday evening, James Wilson explained. $4.8 million in assets administered by Mid-Atlantic Trust Services. My children's inheritance had just become conditional. Trust provisions, James continued, specify educational requirements, employment standards, respectful behavior toward family members. The board reviewed the documents. I'd learned from the best. 35 years of watching wealthy families manage generational wealth. Beneficiaries must demonstrate financial responsibility, James read, must maintain employment for minimum 2 years, must complete financial literacy education, must provide written apology for past disrespectful behavior. The trust was my final lesson in dignity. Margaret Thompson asked, what if they refuse these conditions? Trust assets transferred to Mid-Atlantic Educational Foundation, James replied. Full scholarship fund for children of custodial and maintenance employees. The poetry was perfect. My children could earn their inheritance through respect and responsibility, or their trust fund would educate the children of people they'd always looked down on. The memorial was enlightening, Thomas observed. Your children called your life humble service. They had no idea you'd been serving as unofficial strategic advisor. Humility and ignorance are different things, I replied. The meeting concluded with handshakes, congratulations, and respect I'd never experienced in 35 years of employment. But the real test was waiting outside. My children were in the lobby, 47 floors below. They'd requested a meeting after learning about the board session. Patricia Williams had informed them about the trust conditions. The elevator ride down felt like traveling between two worlds. The executive floor where I was valued, and the ground floor where I'd been dismissed. Neela, Silas, and Adela waited in the marble lobby, dressed professionally but looking diminished. The weekend's revelations had shaken their confidence. "Dad," Neela began carefully, "we need to talk." "About the trust?" I asked. "About everything," Silas admitted. For the first time in years, they were looking at me with something approaching respect. Adela spoke quietly. "We were wrong about your situation." "Situation?" I asked. "Your success," she corrected. "Your wealth, your reputation." The words came slowly, painfully. Admitting error was foreign to their executive training. "We assumed," Neela continued, "that custodial work meant failure," I suggested. She nodded reluctantly. "Limited potential," I added. Silas looked uncomfortable. "We thought we were protecting you from embarrassment." "Whose embarrassment?" I asked. The silence answered everything. 35 years of condescension crystallized into one moment of truth. They'd been protecting themselves from embarrassment, not me. The lobby was filled with Mid-Atlantic employees heading to lunch. Many nodded respectfully as they passed. Some stopped to congratulate me on the consulting position. My children watched these interactions with growing awareness. I was respected here, valued, appreciated. Everything they'd assumed about my life was wrong. The trust documents outlined their path forward: respect, responsibility, and recognition of their father's worth. The choice was theirs, but for the first time in decades, I held the power. The lobby conversation was interrupted by Thomas Anderson's arrival. "Vincent," he said warmly, then nodded to my children. "Neela, Silas, Adela, I believe we met Saturday evening." The formal introduction was deliberate, CEO acknowledging my children as extensions of me, not the other way around. "We were just discussing the trust arrangements," Neela said carefully. "Excellent structure," Thomas replied. Vincent learned from observing our wealthiest clients. "Generational wealth requires generational wisdom." He turned to me. "The consulting contract is ready for signature. 200,000 annually, plus quarterly performance bonuses based on market predictions." My children's faces showed the mathematics. My new consulting income exceeded any of their salaries. "Also," Thomas continued, "the board approved stock option extensions. Another 40,000 shares over 3 years, assuming continued accuracy in market analysis." Adela's investment banking background kicked in. "At current share price, that's 2.3 million in additional equity." "Assuming modest growth," Thomas agreed. "Vincent's track record suggests it could be much higher." The power dynamic was crystallizing. While they'd planned my memorial, I'd been planning my future. "The trust conditions seem specific," Silas said, lawyer instincts engaging. "Vincent's idea," Thomas replied. 35 years of watching family wealth destroy family relationships. He wanted to ensure his children earned their inheritance through character, not just genetics. The trust requirements were non-negotiable: written apologies for 35 years of disrespectful behavior, 2 years of stable employment without family assistance, completion of financial literacy education through Mid-Atlantic's executive program, quarterly meetings to discuss investment strategies and family values, public acknowledgement of their father's intelligence and success. "The apologies must be specific," I said quietly. "Not general regret, specific acknowledgement of condescending behavior, dismissive attitudes, and false assumptions." Neela shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, we were just embarrassed by me," I finished. "For 35 years, in front of your friends, colleagues, spouses, children." The truth hung heavy in the marble lobby. "The trust reflects compound interest," I continued. "Respect earns respect. Disrespect earns consequences." Thomas Anderson checked his watch. "I'll leave you to family discussions. Vincent, the consulting office is ready whenever you want to see it." Consulting office, corner suite on the 45th floor. Windows overlooking the city I'd helped build through decades of investment and insight. After Thomas left, Adela asked the inevitable question: "What if we can't meet the trust conditions?" "Then you forfeit the inheritance," I replied simply. "To a scholarship fund?" Silas asked. "For children of custodial and maintenance workers," I confirmed. "People whose parents you've spent decades looking down on." The irony was intentional. Their inheritance would educate the children of people they considered beneath them. "Dad," Neela said slowly, "we want to make this right." "Want to or need to?" I asked. The distinction mattered. Wanting implied genuine remorse. Needing implied financial motivation. "Both," she admitted honestly. For the first time in years, I heard authentic humility in her voice. The consulting contract was signed that afternoon. Corner office, executive assistant, company car, full benefits package. Everything my children had achieved through expensive education, I'd earned through quiet observation. But the real payoff was psychological. Wednesday's Atlanta Business Journal featured my story. From janitor to millionaire, Mid-Atlantic's secret strategic advisor. The article detailed my investment success, consulting role, and family trust structure. My children's professional networks were buzzing. Their poor father was suddenly Atlanta's most interesting success story. Neela's marketing firm clients were asking for introductions. Silas's law partners wanted investment advice. Adela's banking colleagues requested portfolio consultations. The shame they'd carried for 35 years had transformed into social capital overnight. But the trust conditions remained firm. Thursday brought their first attempt at apologies. Written letters delivered to my new office. Neela's letter. Dad, I apologize for correcting your grammar in public settings. Your intelligence was never the issue. My insecurity was... Silas's letter. Dad, I changed my name because I was ashamed of your job. I should have been proud of your character. Adela's letter. Dad, I banned you from my wedding venue because I prioritized image over family. I robbed my children of knowing their grandfather's true story. The letters were a start, but trust rebuilding required consistent action, not just written words. The financial literacy education began immediately. Mid-Atlantic's executive program, normally reserved for senior management, now included 3 remedial students, my children. Patricia Williams administered their coursework personally. Basic concepts they should have learned decades ago: compound interest, dollar cost averaging, risk management, long-term thinking. I attended their first class as guest lecturer, investment psychology and family wealth. The role reversal was complete. The janitor was teaching the executives. Rule 1, I began, addressing my children directly. Assume nothing about other people's intelligence based on their job titles. The lesson was personal and professional. Rule 2, respect accumulates value over time. Disrespect compounds into isolation. They were taking notes. Finally. Rule 3, true wealth includes relationships, reputation, and recognition. Money without respect is just expensive loneliness. The class ended with homework assignments. Calculate the compound growth of various investment strategies, research successful investors from working-class backgrounds, write essays about the relationship between humility and success. My children were learning lessons they should have absorbed in childhood. The trust was working exactly as designed. Justice wasn't revenge. Justice was education. They were finally getting the education they'd always needed, in humility, respect, and recognizing value in unexpected places. The payoff was perfect. Power through dignity, success through service, and family relationships rebuilt on foundations of mutual respect, rather than condescending charity. 3 months later, the consequences were measurable and permanent. The Atlanta Business Journal story had triggered a cascade of media coverage. Forbes featured me in Unlikely Millionaires. CNBC interviewed me about blue-collar investment strategies. The Wall Street Journal ran an op-ed titled The Custodian Who Cleaned Up on Stocks. But the real impact was on my children's professional lives. Neela's marketing firm lost 2 major clients, not directly. Executive decision-makers simply stopped returning her calls. In Atlanta's interconnected business community, reputation travels fast. The story wasn't about her father's success. It was about her father's children's failure to recognize that success. How can she advise us on executive presence? One former client reportedly said, when she couldn't see the executive potential in her own father? Silas's law practice suffered differently. Estate planning clients began questioning his judgment. If you couldn't assess your own father's financial situation, a wealthy widow asked during consultation, how can I trust your evaluation of my assets? His partnership track was quietly delayed. The firm's reputation required associates who demonstrated superior judgment in all areas of life. Adela faced the harshest consequences. Investment banking depends entirely on client trust and market insight. Her colleagues had discovered that Vincent Miller, the janitor's father she'd hidden from professional events, had outperformed their entire research department for 2 decades. Your father's portfolio returned 12% annually for 35 years, her managing director observed. Our best analysts average 8%. The SEC inquiry into her trading decisions was routine, but the timing was humiliating. While her father consulted with Fortune 500 boards, she was explaining her investment rationale to regulators. The social media impact was brutal but brief. #JanitorMillionaire trended for 3 days, spawning memes about underestimating working-class intelligence. But Atlanta's elite circles have long memories. My children would spend years rebuilding reputations they damaged through decades of condescension. The trust conditions were proving more challenging than expected. The written apologies were complete, but the employment requirements were testing their resilience. Neela had to maintain her marketing position without family financial assistance. No emergency loans, no co-signed credit, no safety net. For the first time in her adult life, she lived exclusively on her own income. The stress was educational. When her BMW needed major repairs, she couldn't afford them immediately. She drove a rental car for 6 weeks, saving monthly payments like her father had saved stock investments. Silas faced similar constraints. His expensive lifestyle, mortgage, car payments, country club memberships, suddenly required careful budgeting. No parental bailouts meant real financial responsibility. The lessons were immediate and effective. They began understanding the relationship between earning and spending, between wants and needs, between image and substance. Adela's situation was most complex. Investment banking bonuses were unpredictable, but her spending patterns assumed consistent income. Without family backup, she faced the reality most Americans knew instinctively: live below your means. The financial literacy education continued weekly. I taught classes in my Mid-Atlantic consulting office, with Patricia Williams providing technical support. My children learned concepts I'd mastered decades earlier: emergency fund calculations, debt-to-income ratios, investment diversification, retirement planning. But the most valuable lesson was psychological. Wealth isn't what you earn, I explained during one session. Wealth is what you keep. They'd earned impressive salaries but saved minimal amounts. I'd earned modest wages but invested consistently. The mathematics were undeniable. Discipline creates wealth more reliably than income. The quarterly family meetings were progress checkpoints, required by the trust, but increasingly anticipated by my children. These weren't lectures. They were conversations. Finally. "Dad," Neela said during our March meeting, "I understand now why you never talked about money." "Why?" I asked. "Because you were watching us, learning our character, deciding if we deserved your respect." The insight was accurate. I'd been evaluating their values for 35 years, waiting for evidence of maturity, humility, recognition of my worth. "And?" I prompted. "We failed the test," she admitted, "for decades. The acknowledgement was painful but necessary. Growth requires honest assessment of past failures." Silas added, "The memorial was our final exam. We failed spectacularly." Adela nodded. Public humiliation was probably the only thing that could have shocked us into self-awareness. They were learning. Slowly, reluctantly, but genuinely. The community consequences were lasting but not permanent. Atlanta's business culture valued redemption narratives, assuming the redemption was authentic and sustained. My children were earning their way back into professional respect. Not through privilege or connections, but through demonstrated character growth. The process would take years, but for the first time in decades, I believed it was possible. The trust was working. The education was effective. The relationships were healing. Justice wasn't punishment. Justice was opportunity. Opportunity to become the people they should have been all along. The aftermath was creating the family I'd always wanted, built on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. 1 year later, the transformation was complete. My children had met every trust condition: employment maintained, education completed, apologies given, respect demonstrated. The financial inheritance was legally theirs. But something more valuable had been inherited: wisdom. Neela's marketing firm was thriving again, built on authentic client relationships rather than manufactured image. Her approach had become more genuine, less performative. "Dad taught me that substance beats style," she told Atlanta Business Journal in a follow-up interview. "I spent 35 years polishing my image while he was building real wealth." Silas's law practice specialized now in working-class estate planning. His personal experience with family financial complexity made him uniquely qualified to help others navigate similar challenges. "I understand both sides," he explained to clients. "The assumptions wealthy families make and the reality working families live." Adela had started an investment education program for blue-collar workers, teaching custodians, maintenance staff, and service employees the basics of wealth building I'd learned decades earlier. "My father proved that intelligence isn't limited by job titles," she said. "Market insight comes from observation and patience, not expensive degrees." The consulting role at Mid-Atlantic had exceeded expectations. My market predictions continued their perfect track record. Stock options were vesting ahead of schedule. The portfolio had grown to $6.2 million. But the real success was relational. Sunday dinners had resumed, not the tense, obligatory gatherings of the past, but genuine family time. My grandchildren now heard stories about their grandfather's business acumen instead of apologies for his humble work. Grandpa Danny taught Mommy about money, 8-year-old Emma announced proudly at school. The shame had been replaced by pride. The boundaries were clear now. Respect was required, earned, and reciprocated. Family relationships operated on mutual dignity rather than financial hierarchy. My children had learned the difference between humility and humiliation, between service and servitude, between quiet competence and loud incompetence. The trust fund had served its purpose. The education was complete. The family was healed. But the most important boundary was personal. I no longer measured my worth by their approval. 35 years of seeking their respect had ended with the recognition that respect cannot be begged, borrowed, or bought. It must be earned and maintained, and defended when necessary. The janitor had cleaned house one final time. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. Have you ever been underestimated because of your job? Share your story in the comments below. The custodian became the consultant. The dismissed became the dignified. The underestimated became the unstoppable. Sometimes the best investment isn't in stocks or bonds. Sometimes it's in setting boundaries and demanding the respect you've always deserved. This is Vincent Miller, signing off. Remember, dignity compounds annually, just like interest.